Modern medicine is perhaps the greatest achievement of human ingenuity. It has increased our lifespan to something that wasn't possible during the rest of human history. However, all these advancements came with a cost. We used to think that cigarettes were healthy, and giving liquor to kids to calm them down was normal. This is not the worst of it. Not worse than trying to fix someone's brain with force. Welcome to the portal, where myths, nightmares, and mysteries are just one step away. My name is Epoch, and I will be your guide. To preserve the light, we must first face the dark. Imagine you are sitting in a brightly lit hospital room. You are anxious, perhaps depressed, or maybe you simply don't fit in. A doctor approaches you. He is confident, he is famous. He tells you that he can fix the static in your brain. He doesn't use a scalpel. He doesn't use a drill. He reaches into a velvet-lined case and pulls out a thin, steel ice pick. He asks you to close your eyes. He lifts your eyelid, and then you hear it. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap of a surgical mallet. This was not a scene from a horror movie. This was the cutting edge of American psychiatry in the 1940s. This was the lobotomy, a procedure that promised to cure the insane, but instead, it created a generation of living ghosts. Tonight, we are digging deep into the history of the ice pick cure and the man who turned the human brain into a construction site. If you have watched this far, remember to subscribe, like, and comment. What would you like to see next? The Nobel Prize for Mutilation. The horror began in 1935 in Lisbon, Portugal. A neurologist named Egas Moniz believed that mental illness was caused by fixed circuits in the brain. He theorized that if he could simply sever the connections between the frontal lobes and the rest of the brain, the patient's obsessive thoughts would vanish. He called the procedure a leucotomy. His first tools were crude. He drilled holes into the sides of the skull and injected pure alcohol directly into the brain tissue to kill the nerves. Later, he switched to a wire loop, which he would swish back and forth to core out pieces of the frontal lobe. The results were mixed. Some patients became calmer. Others became hollowed-out versions of themselves. But the medical world was desperate. Mental asylums were overflowing, and there were no drugs to treat schizophrenia or mania. In 1949, Egas Moniz was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his discovery. This gave the lobotomy a stamp of divine approval. It was no longer a fringe experiment. It was a miracle. And in America, one man was ready to take that miracle to its most terrifying extreme. Walter Freeman and the ice pick. His name was Walter Freeman. He was not a surgeon, but he had the ego of a god. Freeman believed the original Portuguese method was too slow. It required an operating room. It required a drill. He wanted a lobotomy that could be done in 10 minutes. He found his answer in his kitchen drawer, an ice pick. Freeman developed the transorbital lobotomy. The method was deceptively simple and breathtakingly violent. He would knock the patient unconscious using electroshock therapy. Then he would slide the steel pick over the top of the eyeball and through the thin layer of bone in the eye socket. Once the pick was inside the brain, he would swing it back and forth, severing the delicate white matter of the prefrontal cortex. He didn't need to see what he was doing. He did it by feel. Freeman was a showman. He would sometimes perform two-handed lobotomies, inserting picks into both eyes at the same time while photographers snapped pictures. He traveled the country in a van he called the Lobotomobile, performing the procedure in state hospitals, assembly line style. The death of the soul. What did the lobotomy actually do? Walter Freeman claimed it made the patients manageable, and he was right. A violent schizophrenic would suddenly become as quiet as a child. A depressed mother would stop crying. But the cost was the total destruction of the human personality. The frontal lobes are the seat of who we are. They govern our creativity, our foresight, our complex emotions, and our will. When Freeman swished his ice pick, he wasn't curing a disease. He was performing a chemical-free execution of the soul. The victims were left in a state of emotional flatness. They could walk and talk, but they had no spark. They were compliant. They were easy for the nurses to handle. Perhaps the most tragic victim was Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of John Kennedy. Her father, Joe Kennedy, feared her mood swings and rebelliousness would embarrass the family's political ambitions. At age 23, Walter Freeman lobotomized her. The miracle left her with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old. She spent the rest of her life in an institution, hidden away from the world, a vibrant young woman reduced to a shadow because she was inconvenient. The child victims and the end of an era. The darkness of the lobotomy didn't stop with adults. Walter Freeman eventually began lobotomizing children. One of his youngest patients was Howard Dully, who was only 12 years old. His stepmother wanted him treated because he was defiant and disobedient. Freeman agreed that the boy had a split personality and performed the ice pick procedure. Howard survived, but he spent decades wondering why he felt broken. He later wrote a book about his experience, describing the tap, tap, tap of the mallet that stole his childhood. By the mid-1950s, the era of the ice pick began to fade. A new drug called thorazine was introduced. It was marketed as a chemical lobotomy. It was cheaper, safer, and didn't involve driving steel picks into eye sockets. Walter Freeman was eventually stripped of his surgical privileges after a patient died from a brain hemorrhage during her 3rd lobotomy. He died in 1972, still believing he was a hero. The echo in the halls. Between 1935 and 1960, over 40,000 people in the United States alone were lobotomized. The story of the lobotomy is a warning. It is a reminder of what happens when the medical establishment becomes more interested in efficiency than in humanity. It shows us how easily we can be convinced to accept the unthinkable if it is packaged as science. We tread in the darkness of this history, to ensure that the light of medical ethics never goes out again. We must remember the names of those who were silenced so that we never mistake compliance for a cure. Thank you for treading in the shadows with me today. This was a difficult journey, but an essential one. If you believe this history needs to be told, subscribe, like, and share this video. Good night, and remember, the most precious thing you own is the static inside your mind.
Let us now step back into the portal and go to our segment of time and space. If you would like to see a longer video about what we went through today, or if you would like to see another specific video, leave it in the comments. Feel free to check any of our previous voyages on screen. My name was Epoch, and I will see you again on one side or the other. Farewell.